Hi, this is Sangeet, and I think most of you might not have known me before. Uh, this is going to be, as you all know, the first session of the disaster management module. Uh, I think you all downloaded the document which I had sent you because, while taking the class, that will be your key mechanism to follow, know where you are actually. Let's get formally started. See, first of all, let me tell you one thing about disaster management module or the GS3 paper in general, because I have been also taking the economy part. So I think I should tell you this before starting the module. See, there has been a wrong impression or some sort of overconfidence among all of the aspirants that yes, disaster management is something easy with this much of preparation after these many years of preparation. People think that tend to over focus more or less importantly, uh, of course, only on the economy part. But I felt that these disaster management and all, these are underrated subjects. People think that yes, I will be studying on 10 days before the mains, but trust me, that's not going to work because, well, that strategy works, but only if you are aiming for 6 to 7 marks out of, I mean, if you are aiming for 6 to 7 out of the 15 marker question, then that may work. But since you are all wanting to um, have that extra edge, since every mark counts, please understand two things. This module is not see, a lot of effort has been made in designing this all these strategies. So don't think that yes, I know this concept, so I need not listen, I can skip this part now, let me listen it later. So don't fool yourself by telling such things. Try to be as much consistent and regular to attending the module. I hope you're all aware of it. I need not tell this again, but it's my duty to remind you again. While the style of the proceedings will be mostly, I will be sharing before starting the class only. I will be sharing with you the handouts which we are going to discuss today. In that module, these are all not some copy pasted materials or whatever it is. It is purely intellectual property of mine. So please don't be under impression that this can be ignored, or don't take it lightly. Moreover, the handout which I am giving you is only for guidance. It should not act as a substitute for class, right? So while the class is going on, try to take as much running notes as possible. By the end of these sessions, you must be in a position to at least have a good idea of each concept. For example, after 2 minutes, I will be discussing about what are the types of questions being asked in UPSC. See, the problem with disaster management is every concept seems very familiar to you, but while writing the answer, you will not recollect any points. So for that, listening to the class and taking running notes in your own language in the way you understand is most important, I think. So don't get confined to the handouts which I'm giving you. Your running notes and handouts should be compiled, and a short notes has to be prepared by the end of each day, so that for you to easily revise them, it's possible, right? So with this, let's get formally started with the disaster management topics. I think I'm clear so far. Can I go ahead?
Yes, sir.
Okay, right. See, I don't know how many of you are first timers or how many of you are actually experienced aspirants. But if you had went through the previous year questions with respect to, just a minute, Jabir, I will just come back to you. If you are, sorry, I forgot what I was telling. Yeah, if you are aware of the previous year questions of this disaster management module, um, you will observe that two things are recurrently being asked. One is the conceptual based questions, and every year around 25 to 30 marks are being asked from disaster management. So, and these days you are all well aware of the trend of UPSC. There is a blurring of these GS papers. Questions that should be asked in GS3 are being asked in GS1. GS2 questions are being asked in GS4. For example, last year there is a question, national education policy was asked in ethics paper. So this trend has been continuing, and if you take this, there is a high possibility that, for example, every year disaster management questions also come in GS paper one, like as part of geography. So this knowledge will also help you there. And if we build up all those things, around 40 to 45 marks on a maximum scale are coming from this section of disaster management. Directly, indirectly, it might be very higher. Um, so this analysis of what these questions are being asked, two things become very, very self-evident. One, they're asking conceptual based questions. Like I think I had released a short video on this also yesterday. The concept, see, there are n number of concepts under disaster management. That doesn't mean you should by heart each and everything. You should feel that as if it is difficult. See, here in the class, we will try to clear up those concepts and brush up those concepts. And as you all aware, this is more of a revision type of module. So I will try to be as much minimalistic, as much simplistic in the language while explaining the concepts also. So these conceptual based questions are very, very important. And our first class is purely on these concepts. So try to take as much notes as possible. Over the next classes, we will be shifting our focus to specifics of disasters. Like what is our, evolution of our disaster management, evolution of national policies, what are the various disasters, what are the NDMA guidelines in that. So these are all the two types of questions. If you are well aware of these two basic subparts, you can easily manage any other question. I'm not saying that no bouncer can come. I'm only telling you that if you follow diligently, you can even score better even in such bouncer questions with the existing knowledge. This exam is about knowledge up to a threshold level. Applying this knowledge is the remaining part. So please be aware of it. So let's get formally started. In the first, we will be discussing only about the concepts. Today's class will be purely concept based. For example, we will have what actually is a disaster? Why should it be managed? See, many of you might have been aware of what actually disaster is, but I would like to hear from you any responses. If somebody can help me define what actually disaster is, please don't refer to handout. Very fast, only 30 seconds or just 15 seconds. Any quick responses? You can switch on your audio and you can respond. Any idea of what actually a disaster is? A disaster is a loss of life. Yeah, yes, please.
So disaster is a reality of turning hazard into reality.
Hazard into reality. No. Hazard itself is something which is real, right? We'll be discussing what is also the definition of hazard. But hazard is something which has a potential that does not always manifest itself into a disaster. But yes, you had a good start, but that's not actually what a disaster is. See, basically, a disaster is something which is a mishap or a calamity in a grave occurrence. The key point here is something has happened to us and huge amount of losses have occurred that is beyond the coping capacity of us. See, we humans have the unique ability to adapt ourselves to changes, but disaster is one such event which has the potential to overpower our ability to adapt. In simple layman's words, this is what a disaster is. Now refer to your definition. And I also try to underline the key words in them. You try to read them. So that is what a disaster means. A disaster is something which is a mishap or a calamity of a grave occurrence. It may be from either natural source or a man-made source. it may not necessarily mean, I'm not talking about the source. I'm just have a caused by nature. No, yes, it is correct. Have a caused by nature is correct to be a disaster, but what about man-made things? For example, you had the Chernobyl disaster. For example, you had the Vishakhapatnam gas leak. You had the Anas Mandi fire in an industry. So what are those? Those are all man-made. Or you had this in, if you go to the northeast regions, you have something called as a rat hole mining. Often mines collapse and people are buried alive, which often manifests into a disaster. These are all man-made things also, right? So man-made causes as well as natural causes.
So we
These
can
two,
say any event which is deviates from normal and has a negative impact.
deviation from normal need not necessarily manifest in a disaster, because for example, you getting a fever is also not normal thing, but only if it reaches to the level of attacking COVID, that too at a community level, only then we can tell it a disaster, right? Abnormalcy is not a disaster. Abnormalcy to such an extent that our coping capacities are overpowered, then we call it a disaster, right? Any doubts over this?
No,
I
sir,
think it's
clear.
a very simple definition. Don't try to, yeah, this thing I forgot to tell you. We should not be, confined to what I am telling, right? Don't try to go for multiple sources. I will tell you the sources. The first and the best source for anything is NCERT Class 12 Disaster Management. So refer to that. The second and the most important source is national policy documents. That is, National Disaster Management Plan has been given. That policy document has been out, but that is a 384-page document. That is my job to read and put it before you. It is not your job. You are just wasting your time if you are flipping through all these pages. See, proportionately, you are only working for 40 marks. You are not working for being an expert in disaster management. You are only working for getting one step ahead of your competitor. Your competition is not with the disaster management. Your competition is with your competitor. So leave the job of what to tell you on me. I will try to cover as many sources as possible and give you as comprehensive details as possible, right? Yeah. So the only this disaster part, forget about this disaster definition part. I think you had a decent understanding of this. This is the first thing. So the next thing which comes before us is what actually is this disaster we had discussed. How is this disaster different from the preconceptions we had? For example, some of our friends in the first itself had said that a hazard, manifestation of a hazard or something like that. But how is a disaster different from a hazard? So there is also something which is while reading the newspapers, you come across the concept called as risk, hazard and risk vulnerability index, hazard risk zonation. So these things are, there is a slight silver lining between these different concepts. So it's crucial for us to understand what is the actual difference between hazard and what is the difference between hazard and a risk and a disaster. What is a risk involved in a disaster? When can you say that a hazard can turn into a disaster? And in fact, these are all the concepts. For example, tomorrow a question may come, 10 marker, critically analyze, or for example, critically debate on the key issues of difference between disaster, hazard, vulnerability. Or a question might come, in the context of recent disaster management plan of 2019, how would you differentiate? See, these days, personal understanding of concepts are being asked again. So how would you differentiate between hazard and a disaster? So for such type of questions, this clarity is very important. So yeah, hazard. Any responses on what a hazard is? Hazard. What is a hazard? Dangerous. Yeah, true. It is dangerous. Danger by definition, yeah, any incident that has potential to cause harm. Yes, okay, fine, correct. Yes, yeah. So hazard is something which is not actually an event. See, yes, it is a trigger event. Basically, it's a trigger event. Some event might occur, earthquake may occur, or a flood may come, or some um, you know, a radiological accident may occur, like what has happened in Fukushima or like that. That is a hazard. It's not yet a disaster. The disaster only is a manifestation of hazard. If this hazard is not suppressed or if it is not managed, that manifests in the form of a disaster. So hazard is the preconception to a disaster. Disaster is the end result you get. Hazard is the prerequisite for this disaster to happen. So basically, this hazard is any event. What we discussed in disaster, something which has potential or to cause damage, something which causes damage beyond our coping capacity. So already damage occurred as a disaster, but something must have the potential to cause the damage. It is this potential aspect which is called as hazard. When this potential aspect actuated in the form of reality, it is called as a disaster. So this is the small blurring line between hazard and a disaster. Yes, right. So these hazards can be anything. See, after a while, I will be telling you about with a clear-cut example of what actually how a hazard can turn into a disaster. For example, these hazards can be classified into n number of types. For example, on the basis of manifestation, it can be a sudden hazard or a slow hazard. For example, folding of Himalayas, it takes millions and millions of years. If you wish to sit in the continental margins, then that cannot be a hazard, but that's a delayed hazard. Of course, your lifespan will not be sufficient to experience that hazard also. There can also be slow hazards, right? For example, the amount of landslides or the mass movements on 1 year, if you take the up of a hill, yes, that is a hazard. There is a risk of landslide. Yes, of course, climate change and global warming. Yes, these are all potential hazards which take a lot of time. Uh, so there can also be sudden hazards, like for example, earthquake, like a volcano, like a sudden blast from a nuclear reactor. So these are all manifestation of hazards. Based on the time scale, we can classify in such way, which is not very important. You just remember in your mind. Um, the most famous classification is natural hazard and anthropogenic hazards. Natural means something which occurs naturally. Anthropogenic, as our common sense says, means the human-made hazards. For example, these dangerous events which has the potential to wreak havoc can have origin either in nature or in the man-made causes, right? For example, natural hazards. For example, in India, we had something which is called as a JC Pant committee, which further this gave much more classifications, but don't go into all that. These natural hazards can be anything. See, nature is not only about land or water or whatever it is, right? Nature has many aspects. So in that we had geophysical hazards. For example, earth, something related to geophysical, physical features of the earth. What is that? What is that hazard? Earthquake is that hazard. You had something which is called as hydrological hazards. I mean, you had something meteorological hazards. So n number of hazards have been there, and you please refer to that handout. For example, these biological hazards. For example, see, if you ask me where will you place this biological hazard, I say that it is a mix. These days, it has been a mix of natural as well as man-made things. Yes, biology by nature, but human actions are accentuating, right? For example, take antimicrobial resistance. Potential to be a disaster one day, but the hazard is predominantly why? And microbial resistance is natural. These microbes will adapt themselves to have more and more virulence, that is ability to cause a disease. But the human actions by using more number of antibiotics or misuse or discrepancy in using them or using less than the prescribed amounts of antibiotics. So these human actions are combining with nature and creating a new hazard, like this biological hazard, right? I think while discussing about science and technology, we'll learn about this thing called antimicrobial resistance. If somebody is not aware of it, don't worry, right? Then you had also these anthropogenic hazards like chemical disasters. For example, in Syria, the chemical gas attacks, sarin gas, SCRIN, sarin gas, has been thrown by this Assad government on the civilians, which has been the starting point of this Syrian crisis, right? So this sarin gas is a type of chemical hazard. It has the potential to cause damage. Only when it was dropped on the people, it turned into a disaster, right? Similarly, these radiological, nuclear hazards, these are all, I think you're all very, it's self-explanatory. For example, radiological disasters, something which has the potential to create havoc. Radiation, for example, uranium radiations or the gamma or the beta rays which come from them, from a nuclear reactor, or these are all the potential to create havoc. When people are involved around it, or when some sort of environment is involved, is interacting with it, it manifests into a disaster. So this fundamental point will remain the same for every disaster. Potential, manifestation. Potential is hazard, manifestation is disaster. So be clear on it. I think I can go to the next section. See, often it is said, for example, if you take floods, even floods, people say that it is uh, a natural disaster. But it is often said there are no natural disasters, there are only natural hazards. I think telling that natural hazard, for example, this I am not telling, this United Nations Development Program is telling. There is no something which is called as disaster, natural disaster. There are only natural hazards. For example, take this answer, Brahmaputra. I think you're all aware of where Brahmaputra arises and how it enters India. Upon reaching the Namcha Barwa, this Brahmaputra will enter into this Indian continent. Our Indian country by means of a gorge. The valley is very, very narrow. In such narrow valley, see, you must have all read about the physics part, right? If the water flow is flowing through a very small channel, it force multiplies. So it's the same thing occurs at macro level also. When this river is flowing in a small narrow channel, its velocity as well as carrying capacity will get multiplied to such an extent that it carries huge amounts of silt. The same river, when it comes to this Assam region and all these regions, the Assam region has a very lower amount of slopes. Unlike the Meghalayan plateau, where you will have a lot of waterfalls, here silt deposition will not occur. But in Assam, the same river here will not deposit the silt in Meghalayan plateau due to huge number of vast gradient. The same in the Assam region will have huge hazard potential, because here this plain is very low, huge siltation will occur. When the silt is deposited, obviously the river which has to flow at this level, due to the silt, it raises up. This obviously causes flooding to the surrounding areas. This is only a hazard, this is not a disaster. Knowing this geological fact, knowing this unavoidable natural course of a river, you are going and settling on the flood banks of there, and you are complaining of that loss of life is happening. So disaster is mostly man-made thing. You should be aware that there are natural hazards, but manifestation and the quantum of disaster depends on how the humans are interacting with it. This is the key point in the whole disaster management strategy. See, only because of this fact, we are having something which is called as class of disaster management. Otherwise, we will not be telling about how to manage disasters. By very definition, disaster management is how to reduce. Somebody is messaging me. Sorry for that. Yeah, and this is precisely why this management of disasters has been possible. I cannot tell that I will manage so and so disaster unless there is a scope for it. Yes, I can manage because I had a choice to make. I can choose to stay away from the river course. I can choose to monitor or use equipment to how far the flooding is happening. I'm only speaking about floods. This concept we'll be discussing in detail when I come to the concept of disaster management in the next few tens of minutes, right? So I think I made my point here. you're all very aware, you are all aware of the difference between hazard and this disaster, right? Should I repeat any point? Are you facing any difficulty? Am I fast? You please feel free to communicate with me, right? Please.
Sir, sarin gas leak in Syria will also be disaster now.
Sarin is a disaster, yes, but I'm talking about the potential hazard in that chemical. That chemical by itself is a hazard. When that is thrown into people, it's becoming a disaster.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Then can somebody explain me the risk involved? What is meant by risk factor? See, for example, in these COVID times, you have been listening to some sentences like the risk factor is high for so and so individual. The risk factor is high in these populations. People living in that area have high risks. Can somebody define this risk? See, definitions are very important. Please make your short notes must contain definitions. UPSC is one such exam where you have to give ready-made answers for analytical questions. If you think what is meant by risk, how to put that in words there, your time will be wasted, not more than that. You can write, everybody can write, your time will waste. That's it. So try to be prepared before only. Can somebody quantify risk? I think I had used the word again here.
Sir, risk is the probability of harmful occurrence from a disaster, from a hazard.
Yeah, partially true. Yes. Simple man. Simple.
Yes. Simply, it's also the exposure level to the hazard which we are having.
No. The exposure level is the vulnerability. That's the concept which is coming in the next minute. So yes,
we can say that the consequences of a hazard, associated consequences of a hazard.
No, simple, very simple. Risk is nothing but you are measuring the consequence of the hazard. Yes, measurement part, not the consequence. Consequence is disaster. How far the disaster is occurring or the potential of that. It's just a scale. How you measure. It's more about measurement. It's more about quantification. That is called a risk, right? Quantification of expected losses. So some loss is about to happen. You are, for example, if I say this man has a high risk of getting a heart stroke. What do I mean inherently? So his cholesterol levels are high. So this loss factor, these potential hazards are multiplying one after another. He is not exercising. He's sitting all the day. He's ordering from Swiggy and eating. So risk factor is high. So on a scale of health, I am rating him and giving some tagline to him. So that is basically a risk. So quantification of these losses is nothing but risk. In concept of disaster, what is this risk? See, this understanding of risk is very easy and it is very crucial because in the next few tens of minutes, we will come across a concept which is called as disaster risk reduction. So to understand what is risk reduction, just some clarity on risk might help you, right? In concept of disaster, how will you measure this, right? It's about quantification of losses. Yes, for example, I can say that, sir, there is a something which take this COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 pandemic has is it a possible disaster? It's a hazard, biological hazard considered, or a biological pandemic, which is a hazard of potential to create havoc. What is the risk factor involved in that? How will you quantify that risk factor? Yeah, measurement of hazard potential. Yes, hazard potential. Yes, true. Risk is nothing but a function of two key variables. One is the hazard. If this hazard is low, risk will be low. Hazard is high, risk will be less. If I get for example, hazard is something which has potential to do damage. Coughing is a hazard. No. But the risk factor is very low in coughing. Only when that cough transforms into COVID, the risk factor will multiply, right? So hazard level of hazard is one. And also there is a concept called as vulnerability. These hazard and vulnerability combinedly determine something which is a result which is called as the risk. So these two variables determine our risk. Take anything, risk of having a flood here. Go to an area tomorrow when you are posted as a DC in some district. If you visit some area, you must be assessing the risk factor. So what is the risk factor here? You should immediately refer to what is the hazards available here. Okay, this place is in the coastal areas. Okay, what is the possible hazard? What are the vulnerabilities? So okay, this is the coastal area. What is the hazards available here? A flood may come, a high tide may come, or sea level uprise may happen over next 50 years due to climate change or global warming. This is hazard. Now you have to see about vulnerability. How many people are actually living? Are they living just before the shoreline, or are they well behind the shorelines, even if the sea level rises or even if the flood comes? So vulnerability and hazards. Combine these two, you will get the result called as risk. Our whole disaster management. Why are we studying this concept? Because our disaster management by definition means we have to reduce these risks. That is the potential. To understand this risk, we need the definition of hazard, we need the definition of vulnerability. Other than that, there is no purpose of studying these definitions. Right? I think I am clear on that. Any doubts?
Sir, in vulnerability, is it related to only people?
No. I did not yet come to vulnerability. I'm just preparing you that vulnerability has many dimensions. I think I had mentioned all these dimensions in the handouts also, which are provided to you now.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, there are social vulnerabilities, there are economic vulnerabilities, there are, for example, recently there has been a new dimension of vulnerability. When COVID-19 pandemic began, I will discuss it when I'm discussing about the topic of vulnerability. I think next is the topic of vulnerability. Right? Can I proceed further? If you had any confusion regarding vulnerability, just wait for a few moments and it will be destroyed. Right? Yeah. Why and can disasters be managed? See, I know what is hazard, I know what is risk. These two are combining to give me something which is called as a disaster. Now, my question is why to manage, or can we manage these disasters? After listening to the part of risk, you must have very well understood, yes, these disasters can be managed. But why we should be managing these disasters? Why? Why we should manage these disasters? What will happen? See, something which is happening naturally, people out of their own choice are sitting there. Yes, obviously to minimize the losses. Some extra bit, some extra qualitative points. Why disaster is very, very crucial. For example, post 2015, this thing got much hustle and bustle in the media also. Yes, exactly. Sustainable development. I think it's very clear, because see all the sustainable developmental goals. Every sustainable developmental goals needs something which is called as disaster management. If you don't manage the disaster, there will be definitely no possibility of attaining the sustainable development. See, COVID-19 has occurred, poverty rates has increased, sustainable development is not getting impacted. Flood has occurred, the environment which is the tree cover which you are having, the amount of livelihoods, the amount of women in those areas are getting impacted. Don't you think that it will automatically get reflected in maternal mortality rates, new diseases coming, growing health burdens, loss of biodiversity? Every sustainable developmental goal is being directly impacted because of this disasters. That is precisely the reason why in 2015, in tomorrow's class, we will be discussing something which is called a Sendai framework. In 2015, why Sendai framework came? The only reason is there has been a felt need that yes, from 2015 to 2030, our world has something which is called as a sustainable developmental goals. These sustainable developmental goals and disaster management has to go hand in hand, and precisely that is the result of that resulted in something which is called a Sendai framework. So this is the reason why we should be concerned about disaster management. So moreover, even the climate change in 2015, we had signed a third agreement which is called third component, which is very crucial. That is something which is Paris climate deal. You know, you might have read about it in your environment classes, like we had aspire a target of 1.5 degrees Celsius reduction in the global warming levels since 1850s, the immediate targets, the internationally determined contributions. Do you think a disaster, if at all occurs, this target can be reached? I will further explain to you. Do you think climate change reversal or stopping global warming can occur if you don't manage disasters? Obviously not possible, because I will tell you why. When a disaster occurs, it destroys the human ability to go in a sustainable path, which automatically reflects. For example, today, take the live example. Before COVID and after COVID, industries, running of industries is itself a difficult now. People are not asking how you are running your difficulties, how you are you using coal to run your industry, or are you using electricity? The government itself is also not bothered, because running of industries is important now. Why? Because a disaster called COVID has happened. Before COVID, we used to focus more on, I will penalize this industry if you are not using. There is something which is called as PAT, perform, achieve, and trade. Of course, it is now also there. See, our climate targets get a backseat if we are not, if something of this disaster occurs, because our priorities will obviously change. So climate and disaster management has to go hand in hand. Sustainable development and disaster management has to go hand in hand. Disaster management and risk reduction strategies, community-based disaster management, all these related concepts only can give me a wonderful world which we aspired for in 2015. So this is the reason for disaster management. Tomorrow, if a question comes, critically examine the significance of disaster management, or do you think disaster management is overrated? Substantiate your stand. Such type of questions can be tackled with this type of information. I think I'm clear on that. And the most obvious reason for why disaster management, because a disaster, if at all occurs, it destroys not only the future part, but also the past part. Our humans have been developing. 10 years ago, I had established a city. After 10 years, I built a bridge. After another 10 years, I had established a shopping mall. After another 10 years, I had made it a smart city. Suddenly, a disaster came. Gone. All the past development is gone. Years of development, decades of development, gone. Take the Nepal earthquake, for example. It has pushed Nepal decades back, that particular area. And the future prospects. Now, after all these developmental years, after when this disaster occurred, can you think that I have to begin from zero again? Particularly for a developing country like India and Southeast Asian nations, these future prospects are very lost. If the same disaster occurs in America, for example, take the COVID again, they are investing billions and billions of dollars. Our Atmanirbhar package is not even 1/10 of what they had announced. So we don't have the capacity to plan for our future also. Forget about protecting our past. So we had only one choice. We have to protect what have been built in the past. We have to safeguard ourselves to get as minimally impacted from this disaster. At the same time, we have to have the capability. We have to develop that capability to build future in a better way, build back better. This is the next concept which we will be discussing towards the dead end of this class, right? So these three aspects are very, very crucial, and that is why disaster management is important, which is the key theme of our class, right? I think you're taking running notes, right? These are very simple points. Just because I'm explaining, you might feel that it's lengthy and all. You can just summarize it in just point wise. Your short notes should be able to, they should make you think. So try to take as much running notes as possible. Right. So by definition, when I say that I will manage a disaster, I am accepting the fact. The underlying acceptance in me is that, yes, there are mechanisms. There are certain mechanisms where a disaster can be managed. To understand that, we have to understand the concept of disaster management cycle. So disaster management cycle is nothing but sequence of events before and after a disaster. But before going into that, let's discuss one more important concept, which is called as the concept of vulnerability. Right? Vulnerability and can anyone define what vulnerability is? Vulnerability. Vulnerability.
Being prone to some event or some
Hazard.
negative impact.
Yes, exactly. Hazard is potential to create a disaster. Vulnerability is potential to face a hazard. That is vulnerability. Right? Am I clear on that? Simple. Vulnerability. What is meant by vulnerability? Potential to get impacted by a disaster. Potential to get impacted by a hazard. It's nothing but vulnerability. Flood can occur. Flood can occur anywhere. In Assam, when you're staying there, you are more vulnerable. If you are moving away from, see, when earthquake occurs, why people run away out of their houses? Or when your building is shaking, when an earthquake comes, I think people in Delhi will experience for every 1 month or 2 months, short amount of tremors. Right? Why are they running out of their rooms? Because their vulnerability is high if they stay inside the room. Their vulnerability is less if you're of getting impacted is less than they stay outside. So just putting it in a sentence, it's nothing but vulnerability. So are you clear on that? Is this all vulnerability is? Or is there much more to vulnerability? Yeah. Vulnerability is actually a multi-dimensional concept. The moment I say vulnerability, you think that vulnerability of a person. But no, yes, that is the popularly understood meaning. But according to, see, let's forget about who told and what. In Hyogo framework, there is something called as Hyogo framework, which we will be discussing shortly in the next, in the third class or second class, right? This Hyogo framework has defined vulnerability in a quantitative manner, comprehensively, that I had provided you in your handout. What is that? Please read out. What is that? Vulnerability as defined is the conditions determined by physical, social, economical, environmental factors or processes which increases susceptibility of a community to the impact of hazard. A hazard is occurring, your susceptibility to get impacted, probability of being impacted. This is vulnerability, probability of getting impacted. See, these are very, 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 very simple things, but they transform into very, very, very complex things when we write the answers. That's why multiple revisions of these definitions. Just identify the keywords: susceptibility, hazard. Just that thing must blink. Even if I make you awake at midnight, 3 o'clock, and ask you what is hazardability, what is meant by vulnerability, you must be able to say this point: susceptibility of a person to get impacted by a hazard. That simple point. Political, economical, social dimensions that you will automatically recollect when you understand what vulnerability is, right? So these are the key terms. Make note of them and just mug them up to such an extent that you can recollect at any given point of time. Because trust me, these definitions are the parts where we tend to waste our time. If you remember some definition, you can write. Even if you don't know how to, see, major time waste occurs in a question where we don't know how to introduce. We want to introduce like Shakespeare's. We want to give the best possible introduction, and 90% of the times definition happens to be best introduction. So you need not waste time like your competitor if you had these definitions on your hand. So try to make them right. This is the definition. So what are the dimensions of this vulnerability? I think I am not fast, right? You're all able to follow me. If you are, if you feel that I'm going fast, you just ask me to slow down. I don't take it in a negative way. You can feel free to communicate with me, right?
So little slow, sir.
Okay, right. Vulnerability. Then you had, what are the various dimensions of this vulnerability? What are the various dimensions? Forget about what dimensions vulnerability has. Any question, if I ask you what is the dimension, recollect, close your eyes and recollect from paper 1 to paper 4. Social, economical, political, environmental, attitudinal, or ethical. So these are all the 5 dimensions possible. In anything, in any paper, dimensions means this. Here also same. First and foremost is physical vulnerability. Physical, that is some materialistic aspect of me, either me or my house or my town. These are the, see, Geographical, it may be geographical or whatever it is. Geographical vulnerability means vulnerability of a place to some hazard. Now, for example, flooding is not an issue in Delhi. Urban floods is different. That's not the riverine floods, right? Or tsunami is not at least a hazard in Delhi. Or it's not, Delhi is not vulnerable to tsunamis. It's vulnerable to earthquakes, right? Similarly, huge amount of rainfall, you can't expect it in a desert. It's not, it doesn't have this geographical vulnerability there, right? So these vulnerabilities which are due to the geographical location or the physical presence of a particular person in a place where hazard is occurring, we call it as physical vulnerability. Don't try to complicate it, just be very, very simple. Take this example. For example, assume that you had a building, an earthquake had happened. Same earthquake, let's assume the magnitude of 5. The vulnerability is high if you are staying in Delhi. The same house, if you are constructing in Delhi, you are highly vulnerable getting impacted by an earthquake. That is your physical vulnerability, because your location based vulnerability it is, because Delhi is under a high risk zone. You might be aware of that, right? Bureau of Indian Standards had released a detailed document of hazard zonation. It had categorized some areas as extremely earthquake prone, some as extremely low earthquake prone, and Delhi is last but one category, right? Less than highest. So in that category, Delhi is there. So vulnerability, that is the physical presence of you in Delhi, you are highly vulnerable to face an earthquake. The same vulnerability will not be there if you are in down south areas. Forget about liquefaction and all these things. In the Deccan Plateau, it is relatively table land, right? In table land, this is a concept which you learn in geography, where more or less it is stable. It's an old landmass, right? So this vulnerability, this is the physical aspect of your vulnerability. Then the same thing, in the same place in Delhi, if you build your house out of concrete, your friend has built his house out of wood. This wooden house and this concrete house, if at all an earthquake occurs side by side, the damage potential or susceptibility of the person living in this concrete house will be higher than the person living in the wooden house. So vulnerability is a function of physical factors and geographical location. Physical vulnerability. Why people living in Japan, despite having huge number of earthquakes, are not able to face much damage? Just see, the magnitude of Nepal's earthquake, even higher magnitudes of earthquakes occur daily or at least fortnightly basis in Japan. But Japanese have adapted well because of their adaptation. It may be wooden houses or it may be there. So these physical vulnerabilities determine our adaptive responses. So that is the second point I'm trying to make here. So I'm telling you how to apply this concept of vulnerability. So any confusion? Physical vulnerability.
So, sir, physical vulnerability includes geographical vulnerability and also this material vulnerability.
For now, yes, think like that only. Don't, while going much deeper into the disaster management concept and while we're discussing about disaster risk reduction, we'll try to differentiate in a much more way. For now, just focus on physical aspect. That is, assume that yes, physical vulnerability is coterminous with this geographical location or your presence at a particular place, right?
Okay, sir.
Then you had something which is called as economic vulnerability. See, for example, when a disaster occurs, not every person will get impacted in the similar manner. You must have been aware of the recent report. For example, at a Davos summit, World Economic Forum has released some report which is called the inequality virus. Due to this COVID, few people had been thrown into poverty. On the other hand, billionaires have increased their wealth by n number of times. They had added almost $13 trillion to their accounts. Indians, I'm talking about Indians. And some estimates like this Azim Premji University and all, they had did an estimate, and according to their estimate, the other people had the commoners due to COVID, 15% rise is seen in poverty levels. In urban areas, it even extended to 20% rise in poverty levels. 20% new people joined poor category, economically poor. So don't you think vulnerability has an economic dimension also? If a person is poor, he has the higher vulnerability of further getting into poor if a disaster occurs. A person who is rich, see, how many of you had heard, tell me, even if urban floods are occurring in Bombay or in Odisha, it is the poor who get impacted the most. How many of you have heard that a well-off industrialist had got impacted due to so-and-so disaster? Very rarely, or almost negligent, or almost non-existent. Why is that? Because the economic capacity of individuals is different. This is also true in case of countries. Why do you think USA is least bothered? Because about COVID virus. But India is not so. And India and Kenya are at differential levels of economic levels. So their vulnerabilities for the same disaster are different. So susceptibility to get impacted also has a economic dimension to it. If the same COVID, in the same quantum, in the same, force attacks Nigeria, India, and US, all three countries at the same time, the vulnerability of Nigerians will be higher. Economic vulnerability. Indians will be medium, and US will be the least vulnerable in terms of economy, because they had a robust economy which is least impacted. For example, your livelihood opportunities, for example, n number of economic dimensions are there. For example, your economic assets, it's not only about livelihood, it's not only about your economy, but also your economic assets which are vulnerable. For example, if you are establishing a factory in some coastal area, in some Vizag, for example, why IT industry is only developed in Hyderabad, not in Vizag? Prone to disasters. The economic vulnerability is higher. These data center parks and all, the Hyderabad has more or less a stable weather. It is unimpacted or less impacted by all these disasters. But Vizag, on the other hand, it's on the coastal lines. Cyclones like Fani, cyclones like Phylum, they had the potential to create havoc. These economic assets have higher vulnerabilities to get impacted more in Vizag and less in Hyderabad. So this is the point I'm trying to make. Am I clear on this?
Yes, sir.
And sir,
Social-
can we
Yeah.
say that, sir, the poorer people have, we can relate this with coping capacity, like poorer people have less coping capacity to deal with disasters.
Yeah, true. That is actually coping capacity. Yes, that is more of capabilities part. Vulnerability is the potential to get impacted more.
Yes, sir. So if, sir, economic vulnerability is also like they have less coping capacity, we can write like this also.
Yes, see, these borders are not watertight. One vulnerability switches to the other. For example,
Yes, sir.
yeah. That's what in the first point also I tried to make physical, geographical, right? Yeah. Then you had social vulnerability. For example, if a disaster occurs, for example, consider a flood has occurred in Tamil Nadu in 2014. Can a disabled person swim on himself? Can a woman swim on an equal footing with a man? A man has the ability to save himself from the disaster. So who will be more vulnerable? Women are more vulnerable for a disaster. So this, for example, we had recently a concept which is often in current affairs: disaster inclusive disaster risk, disability inclusive disaster risk reduction. It's directly a result of this differential vulnerabilities of people, societal vulnerabilities. For example, take social aspects increasing your vulnerability. See, many of you might have been aware when you read the Indian society part. Can I get to the doubts part later, so that after this flow is over?
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Basically, economic vulnerability, if I had to put in words, this is nothing but the susceptibility of an economic activity or your economic position to a hazard. It's nothing but economic vulnerability, right? Then you had social vulnerability, like disabled people will get impacted differently. The so-called Dalits or the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, they had the higher susceptibility of certain disasters. For example, if you see the settlement patterns, they will be pushed to the margins of settlements. They will not be having the enough amount of space. So in case of, for example, consider their land holding capacities and all. Again, here you had this differential holdings of lands. In the event of drought, a large farmer might have enough number of stock grains. He might not have, because of his location in particular. His social status, the relief material may not reach him. So these are all the social vulnerabilities. These are different dimensions. Minorities will have different dimensions. For example, when reading about communal riots in Northeast Delhi, the communal riot is more and more becoming of a disaster. Why do you think the number of people who got impacted, that is Muslims, let me be very clear here, why they are why they became very, very vulnerable to these type of emerging disasters? Because there has been a tendency of something which is called as staying at the same place. We call it as ghettoization. So that increases their vulnerability to in the event of such trigger factors, like by some any anti-social elements or like. So society has several inequalities, and those will have increase or decrease the vulnerability concepts. Again, here I can bring the economy part. Few parts of a society may be well off, and that obviously results in less social vulnerabilities. So don't get confused. The borders are very, very blurred with respect to all these vulnerabilities. Once you revise that, you will get a better understanding. There are also the environmental vulnerabilities. For example, natural environments vulnerability, susceptibility, right? For example, when these Visakhapatnam gas leak disaster happened to, I think it occurred about 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago. When that disaster has occurred, the total environment got impacted. Or, for example, take mine blast or mine collapse. The total environment or the biodiversity of that area will get impacted. So the vulnerability of the biodiversity or that particular environment to such particular disaster is higher. So this is what environmental vulnerability is. So these are all the various dimensions. See, recently there has been attitudinal vulnerabilities also, right? For example, if you take this COVID-19 pandemic, it has huge amount of psychological impact on all these people. This so-called hazard or the so-called biological disaster. These people with a positive attitude and a negative attitude. This negative attitude person has higher vulnerability to get impact. Positive attitude person has a lesser impact. So psychological vulnerabilities, these are all psychological vulnerabilities. See, this is purely common sense. I'm just trying to quantify that common sense by categorizing them into different aspects, right? Everybody knows this, but while writing your answer, you must be able to just, if you write a hub and spoke diagram and write just 1 or 2 points each with just one example, the examiner will be more than satisfied. Because yes, examples are very, very must, because they give you flavor to your answer. I think those who are attending the answer writing classes might also, who interacted with me, must have known this, right? I think I can switch to the next level.
And sir, vulnerability, so it is a characteristic, so it can be both positive as well as negative. Like in attitudinal vulnerability,
Yeah.
I have read about example like the Ladakh people have like developed isostupas. So it is a positive attitude of those people. So
In the event of disaster, yes, in the event of some hazard which is imminent, the
yes, sir.
attitudinal differences, the vulnerability. If there is no attitude, if I remove that attitude part, A and B will get impacted in the same way. But because of this attitude, remaining all things, economy, social, political aspects, these are all uh, being equal only if I take the attitude part. If these two have same attitude, they will get equally impacted. But vulnerability is high to get impacted if he has a negative attitude, if he has a positive. This is just one example, right? Attitude, just one example, right? Positive, negative attitude. Simple point.
So vulnerability as a concept is neutral. Means
Vulnerability. I think we will be diverting if I go into that ethical part of vulnerability. But yes, vulnerability is just neutral concept. It differs in quantum. It does not have any other. But in context of social vulnerabilities, we have this concept of religion aspect, this social caste aspect, and all these aspects will come in social vulnerability. It cannot on the say, but for our disaster management class, we should take it in a neutral way. We should not be carried away by this passion, right?
and sir, ghettoization of which community you talked about in rights?
Ghettoization. I spoke about Muslims.
Okay.
Yeah, this is not my point. This actually there is a committee which is called a Sachar committee report. If you read that
Yes, sir.
Sachar committee report, what are the various vulnerabilities? The committee had went very deep. That committee into the yes, you can freely ask by means of audio because this message and pops up is distracting my this thing. Just a minute. Yeah. Um, in that they had told that the vulnerability of this community has been higher to communal rights because of this concept of ghettoization. That is, they tend to live all these kins from the same family. They tend to live in an urban area in some specific areas. I think you must have well observed in your own hometowns also. This has been a recurrent phenomenon. Yeah,
Okay,
that
sir.
thing.
Thank you, sir.
Just a minute. I think I had a lot of doubts. Let me go through them. Yeah, Janvit is Sachar committee. Rajendra Sachar committee. Attitudinal vulnerability is like if I think I will be affected by COVID, then I will be impacted more. But if I take care of self and follow protocol and don't think about it, then I'm at low risk. Yes, you can say that in one sense. This I am not telling again. This AIMS Randeep Guleria had said that. Yeah, I think let's restart the topic. Yeah, see, irrespective of these many dimensions of vulnerability, there are certain fundamental things. There are certain fundamental aspects, root causes, which dictate or which dictate this vulnerability levels of a person or communities. What are those root causes? Can somebody predict what are the root causes? Right? What are the root
Sir,
causes?
can you repeat the question, sir?
Yes, the vulnerabilities, there are n number of, we had discussed these types of vulnerabilities, right? Vulnerability of a population to get impacted by a disaster is a crucial concept to understand in concept of disaster management. In the concept of discussing this vulnerability, I am asking, there are certain root causes in our Indian society or in our lifestyle which are very crucial in determining this vulnerability. Can you tell me those root causes? For example, if a question comes, what do you think are the fundamental reasons for increased vulnerability of Indian population to disasters? What do you think?
Sir, we can take social determinants,
Yes.
like housing inequalities,
Poverty.
Yes, poverty is one thing. Yes. Can I say the poverty is obviously the fundamental reason, because a poorer person, you cannot ask him to build a house in a safe area, or you cannot ask him to build a house which is earthquake resistant. Obviously,
no,
poverty determine a lot of things.
also
Yes.
rapid urbanization, which is leading to slum proliferation.
The fundamental reason is land use management, the style in which we are using our land, the way in which we are urbanizing is coming out because it's faulty. Urbanization way is faulty because the land use situation in urban areas is not good. See, same, if you don't know anything, paper 1 to paper 5. What are the political causes? What are the economic causes? Urbanization is definitely a reason. Urbanization does not per se by itself increase the vulnerability, but the style in which we are using the urban landscape, our inability to create habitable urban spaces, and our inability to have a precise solid waste management, precise pollution control. So do you know, how many of you know that cloud bursts and urban floods are occurring because this urban heat island effect is augmenting or multiplying the amount of rainfalls there, right? So these are all the man-made causes. So our style, our developmental style is the thing to be blamed, right? This developmental style, for example, ordinary agriculture will not have made me vulnerable to a drought disaster. A drought could not have been a disaster if I am following organic farming. But you are unnecessarily filling it with artificial chemicals. You are killing all the soil microbes. You are taking away the nutrition. The soil, which has the self-rejuvenating capacity, is becoming dead. You are pulling out the water extremely, even unnecessarily, thanks to free electricity and all these things. So obviously, the vulnerability of drought will increase. The fundamental reason I am asking, land use types, land use management types, the developmental model which we are accepting, be it urbanization, be it agriculture, be it in service sector, be it industrialization, the choice of developmental choices we make are not sustainable. That impactly obviously reflects in more vulnerability to our disasters. So that increases our vulnerability to disasters. That's the point I'm trying to make. Right? Then obviously there are political causes also. For example, how many of you had, if you are reading the newspapers, you must have been very well aware, till few days back, the center and the states are at loggerheads, even now, on who should be responsible for tackling the COVID-19 aspects. Even in the Supreme Court daily, they are arguing, I am not responsible for so and so part. The law does not commit me. The states are responsible. States say, no, you are financially responsible for this. You have to supply me oxygen. So this fundamentally is a reason of our inefficacy or insufficiency of our existing laws and policies. We don't have a clear-cut policy. We did not have a clear-cut delineation of responsibilities. The disaster, see, the word disaster itself is not mentioned in the Constitution. That is why the second ARC committee has said that why not include it in the concurrent list? All our Epidemic Diseases Act, all our these amendments to make the doctors punishable, the Disaster Management Act, it's not clear in the Constitution. There is no word called disaster. We made it by extracting powers from some other articles. The Disaster Management Act was enacted by taking provisions called social security and unemployment related issues. Using that powers, the central government has enacted this Disaster Management Act. Right? Epidemic Diseases Act is not even a central government act. The Bombay Municipal Commission, the state of Bombay, 1897, it had created that act. There are a lot of insufficiencies. It does not determine, it does not clearly tell what an epidemic is. Had the definition been clear, today this conflict in disaster management of COVID pandemic would not have arisen. Right? So these insufficiencies of laws and policies, as we had seen in the example of COVID-19, is the fundamental political reason behind increasing this vulnerability. It increases our vulnerability to disasters. Had these provisions been clear, the states and the center would have done their jobs well before the pandemic had set in, and we must not have lost these many lives in the second waves. Right? So vulnerability obviously increased because of lacunae here. Political vulnerabilities. Right? The same political causes, they're all social causes. Some of our friends had said rapid urbanization. I also said that settlement patterns in our villages. So these are all the root causes. These are all the causes of increasing the vulnerabilities of us. Right? Similarly, the most frequent challenge which this vulnerability is increasing day by day is climate change. while reading your environment classes, you must have come across a point which is called as positive feedback loop. Can somebody tell me what positive feedback loop is? Yes. A positive feedback loop is nothing but an event is happening. It is resulting in a result. This result is again augmenting this event. For example, take this: global warming is happening, right? One event not creates another event, it amplifies the another event, right? For example, CO, you are releasing CO2, global warming is increasing, the permafrost is melting due to global warming. More and more decayed plants are coming out, which are not previously outside the earth. Now most of the methane which is trapped in permafrost is coming out, and it is again adding to global warming. Again chain reaction, again melting, new and new methane is getting added, new and new global warming is happening. This is a cycle of augmentation of the actual process. This is called as positive feedback. Now this vulnerability, this climate change has been the fundamental reason again for this vulnerability. Climate change has to be blamed. For example, if you don't know, yeah, yes, heat domes, California, you can tell n number of, for example, the albedo factor of snows getting melt, the albedo factor reduces, more and more amount of snow will get in turn multiplied. So these are all the positive feedback loops. So vulnerabilities are increasing day by day due to this climate change and global warming. So that's the point I'm trying to make. Simple, don't try to complicate it. Yes, these climate change and global warming are in fact again multiplying our vulnerability quotient. And now since this vulnerability is occurring, increasing, hazard, the same hazard will be there, vulnerability is increasing. Now obviously risk factor will increase. Risk is equal to vulnerability into hazard. When risk increases, probability of disaster increases. So this is the chain of events, right? I think I'm clear on that.
So can you repeat the chain of events once again, sir, the last part?
Yeah, when this vulnerability is increasing, see, previously we discussed a concept of risk, potential to get impacted. Risk is equal to, is a function. What is risk? It's a function of which hazard is occurring and how much vulnerable are you. If the same quantum of earthquake is happening, this vulnerability, for example, 5 magnitude earthquake, it is constant. Vulnerability is increasing because of all the factors which we discussed: climate change, or your developmental process, or your political lacunae. Your vulnerability has been, instead of this, is became this much. Now the addition of this hazard, your vulnerability has expanded. Obviously risk will expand. When risk expands, the disaster will get expanded, because when higher amount of risk means higher the potential to get impacted by the disaster hazard. Obviously it manifests into a disaster.
Understood.
You want an example?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, consider this. Beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, first wave versus second wave. Same population, same COVID. In few places, they did not follow social distancing norms. In few places, they did not impose strict lockdowns. So political lacunae, people's irresponsibility, social causes, their vulnerability increased. Same COVID, vulnerability increased in few places in rural areas, voluntary lockdowns. We will not come out even if you ask me to come out. So that is the reason why the risk has become higher in urban areas where there is high amounts of vulnerability due to lack of social distancing, ignorance on part of people, not wearing masks. Vulnerability quotient increased. Same coronavirus hazard, vulnerability differences. Risk is different, rural, urban. So while COVID has transformed into a disaster in Delhi, it may not be so in some remote tribal village. I think I'm clear on this.
Yes, sir.
Here I had given a small diagram. I had collected it from source. The relationship between hazard, disaster, and vulnerability, the same chain of events which we have spoken about, which we have spoken about. Yeah, disaster management of disasters is not explicitly mentioned in any of these lists. we are extracting, this will become more of a polity thing. I will discuss it in detail when we come to this part. Is there what are the provisions with respect to Disaster Management Act? Disaster Management Act, we are interpreting it as disaster management in our own sense. For example, the social security, unemployment, these are the areas from which we derived powers of managing the disasters, and we frame the Disaster Management Act. Yeah. Please go through this diagram once. The chain of events which I had discussed, the vulnerability and the relationship with hazard and all these things. Please go through this diagram. The underlying causes which we discussed, the hazards are constant. The potential to create havoc, the earthquake, there is more or less the things that can be managed here will be very less. Vulnerability here, it is in disaster management, it is the vulnerability part which we focus more, because these are the things which are under our control. We can change our vulnerabilities, right? Only then we fail to change these vulnerabilities, it manifests into a disaster. Example number 2. See, in 1999, there is a cyclone in Odisha. Experts say in last 1 century, over the 100 years, that is the largest amount of largest magnitude of cyclone, tropical cyclone, which has ever occurred in any Asian country. 10,000 people died. Vulnerability very, very high. Same people, they learned few things, they learned lessons, tried to manage the disaster. Their vulnerabilities got drastically reduced, and today in Amphan, they evacuated, I think, almost 1.2 million people, world's largest evacuation, within just 4 days. So that is the level of commitment on the Odisha people, which even Narendra Modi had said that. See, the Odisha people have been successful in reducing their vulnerabilities. It's time for all the states to collaborate with them and learn from it. Even the same magnitude of cyclone, 10,000 people died then. Now, not even, I think, almost zero casualty, or very less number of casualties when compared to this 10,000. Why? Because of function of hazard is same. This tropical cyclones, but vulnerability is changed. So disaster management focuses more on tackling these vulnerabilities and all these things. Yes, we also try to interfere in terms of hazards also. Like we try to understand which hazard is coming, when it is coming. So we'll be discussing it more in the disaster management cycle when we discuss it. So I think this, if you go through this diagram, it's beneficial. Yeah. Then we'll shift to the concept of disaster management cycle. See, these are the conceptual clarities which we need to have before we fundamentally discuss about how to manage a disaster. The first point of managing any disaster, any means any disaster, is to understand disaster management cycle. Yes, please.
Sir, risk also depends on coping capacity.
Yes, it depends.
If the coping capacity will be more, then risk will be less. So I have read that risk is hazard into vulnerability by capacity.
Yes, you can say that.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Disaster management cycle. See, this disaster management cycle is nothing but a framework. Our experts had divided how to manage any disaster into several phases. That is nothing but disaster management cycle. Open the handout and see the diagram. Basically, there are 2 parts. One is the preparedness part and one is the response part. In between these 2, you had something which is called as a disaster, right? Cycle is nothing but it's a strategy to tackle a disaster so that our impacts are our vulnerabilities reduced. There are n number of things which we do as part of this disaster management cycle. It's nothing but in the first phase we will be preparing ourselves. That, for example, we may say that yes, I will have an early warning system, I will have a dedicated network of satellites to predict a disaster and all this. This is the preparation phase. Then the disaster occurred. Now I will try to respond. Here I can't say suddenly if a flood came or suddenly if an earthquake occurred. Now my task is not to be focused on establishing sensors to measure the earthquake. These are all not my priorities. Response part is different. So I am reacting to something after an event. What this response will have? This response will again have several mechanisms. I may rehabilitate, I may take up rescue operations, I may perform myself into this giving food and temporary shelters to all these impacted people. So n number of things. So you kindly just try to remember this disaster management cycle. Very, very important, because this disaster management cycle and what we do at each part acts as a template for every answer which we try to write in these specific questions. For example, UPSC has been asking every year, what is a landslide, and discuss what are the key guidelines of National Disaster Management Authority to tackle the landslide. What is a cyclone? What are the key guidelines? Unless this concept of disaster management cycle reels in our head, we cannot understand the topic. We will be discussing. See, this cannot be. You try to experience it in the course of discussion. If I try to dictate what is involved in each part, that would be more mechanical. At each stage, I will take one aspect, and every year, one or the other aspect is being asked as a separate question. For example, now I said, as part of preparedness, I will focus on early warning systems. It is being asked as a separate question. As part of preparedness, I will say that community-based disaster management is important. That itself is a separate question. I will say that relief and rehabilitation as part of response to a disaster. At every stage, I am telling. At recovery part, I will say that I will build back better. Every part is being asked as a separate question, conceptual based questions. What do you understand by early warning systems? How do you think it is important? What do you mean by community based disaster management? How do you think it is important in course of disaster management? What do you meant by relief and rehabilitation? How do you think it is important for in the course of disaster management? So rather than just memorizing what are the subparts, try to experience it by having a conceptual clarity on each subpart, which I'm going to tell, right? See, preparedness part is more of a preemptive things which we do before actually a disaster occurs. It might include a wide range of activities. For example, I may say that in 100 days, I will get an earthquake in Delhi. Now, what I will do to prepare myself for that becomes the first part of disaster management cycle. For example, I may try to prevent myself, or I may take measures to mitigate that risk. Or in case I will prepare myself. See, I will build my building with the earthquake resistant material, so that in case an earthquake occurs, my vulnerabilities will be less and I will be impacted less. Or I will try to stock myself with all the food supplies. I will have a specialized sensor networks. At a government level, I will bring in more and more sensors and maps to exactly understand where actually there is a possibility of having a disaster or a particular hazard, where there is a potential of that hazard to happen. These are all the preparatory phases. In each of this, we will try to understand the key things. For example, there is something which is called as early warning system. We will be discussing it in great detail. So pre-disaster phase, in disaster phase, there are few things. For example, when disaster had actually occurred, my priority immediately shifts to asking the NDRF personnel to go there. Here, my priority is transporting them. Here, my priority is to give them food and shelter who are suffering from the disaster. Then, after the disaster has happened, actually, after the disaster, what I will do here, my priorities in the cycle again changes. Here, what are the key tasks? I may ask media to help me. I may ask NGOs to help me. I may build temporary homes. For example, Atmanirbhar package. This is the post-disaster thing. It is meant for post-disaster, not actually while the disaster is still continuing, they gave the guidelines. It is meant for building back again, bring back the normalcy. That is previously the levels which are existing before the disaster had occurred. I am trying to go back to those levels. Relief, rehabilitation. I am trying to give back the jobs who are negatively impacted by so and so disaster. I am trying to give them land again who had lost the crop, or I am trying to give some sort of compensation to them. So these are all the relief and rehabilitation works. There is certain subtle difference between this relief, rehabilitation, and all. We'll be discussing in course. I'm just giving you the background of our discussion. Then we'll go to micro details now at each stage. I think here you got in this handout what are the basic things, right? Pre-disaster stage, what are the key issues involved in that? During the disaster, what we will be doing? What are the various components of disaster management cycle? Right? Post-disaster, what is meant by relief and rehabilitation and all these things. For example, relief is nothing but the immediate response which you take, right? Immediately after the for example, some 100 people, a flood immediately came in Uttarakhand. They drowned, and some of them are happen to be survivors. My immediate task is not to repair the road. Relief is I am giving immediate relief to those victims. Maybe food, it may be shelter. Rehabilitation means bringing back to their normalcy. After they get this relief, they will be taken to that levels where they used to exist before the disaster. That is rehabilitation part. Here I think I had given a table of delineating the differences between relief and rehabilitation and all these things. I think I'm clear on this. Yeah, I will discuss about SWAN, statewide area network. In preparatory phase, we'll be discussing about while discussing about early warning systems, I will come to that SWAN network. This is just an introduction to you. I will discuss each and every part of it in detail. Statewide area network is nothing but it's a hub and spoke model. If you had heard about it, there will be a command and control center. They will disseminate the communication. Network of all the communication centers will be there. For example, Indian Meteorological Department is predicting the cyclone to be occurring in next 2 days. How are you able to get that information immediately within hours? Because there is statewide area network of internet connectivity, of wide communications. Network can be of any form. Network of organizations which are involved, hierarchy chain. So these statewide area networks are crucial to establish for successful communication. And communication in turn is part of disaster. See, I accept that these are all a bit boring. These concepts are a bit theoretical in nature. Some of you might have been feeling that I know all this, why to have this? See, I also accept that most of you might have known this, but you may not be able to know the sequence in which of where to write what to write where. If a question is being asked, discuss about the disaster management cycle. How many of you think that, yes, we all think that we can write a decent answer, but the real-time scenario will be different. So try to be patient. And when we shift the focus of our classes from these purely theoretical parts to the practical parts, what we will be focusing on disaster, what the plans and all, the classes becomes more interesting, right? So this is the leeway. Not only this, while doing this for internal security or these are more dry areas. So people tend to lose interest. So don't go into that zone. Accept the reality and just bear with it. Okay. I think I'm clear on that. Capacity building and all these things. Capacity building is nothing but ability. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Have you gone through this pre-disaster phase, during the disaster, post-disaster, and all these things? Try to go through that. Disaster management cycle, very, 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 very important. This thing has to reel in your mind. Even if you see, apply anything to this, you will get an answer. Apply what will you do in case of preventing yourself? How disaster management has to be done in case of urban floods? Apply this matrix. Pre-disaster phase. What will we do? Awareness and preparedness. Awareness of urban floods. Capacity building. What is meant by capacity building? Capacity building is nothing but ability of a person to respond to something. It may be person, it may be institution, it may be organization. So that in the pre-disaster phase, some of you might have found this confusing. What is meant by capacity building? Every stakeholder must have the capacity. For example, the capacity, capacity of a state to face a disaster, capacity of an individual or a victim who is facing the disaster, economic capacity, environmental capacity, multi dimensions, n number of points you can write. This can be even a separate question. What do you think is the importance of capacity building in the course of disaster management? Discuss. So be very, very diligent while the same points which we discussed above, social, political, economical dimensions, which increase the vulnerability. The same matter has to be just manipulated here to suit this. What is meant by capacity building and all this, right? Capacity building, for example, you can say that in course of preparatory phase, you have to increase the capacity of population. For example, take the local population who are susceptible to a disaster. Population living in, for example, a coastal area, Chennai floods, take the disaster of Chennai floods. With capacity, without capacity. With capacity, take the simple example of knowing swimming. 100 people know swimming, 100 people don't know swimming. Now flood came. Who will survive? Those who know swimming will survive. So capacity. Again, at state level, rich state, poor state, same disaster. Capacity of rich state is much, much higher, right? Poor state, capacity of tackling the disaster will be very, very lesser. This rich state can afford higher early warning systems. They can even tonight they can launch a satellite to monitor which hazard is coming or not. This poor state cannot do. This rich state will have n number of officials working for it. It can give salary to n number of officials and hire extra workers if needed to tackle a disaster. Poor state cannot do it. Capacity of a state. This capacity of a state, for example, rich state or influential state, it has a bargaining capacity. For example, today, if India is asking, we want something from America, if India is asking, please give us vaccines, America is listening. N number of other countries are also asking, but their capacity is less. Same disaster. Capacity of state makes a difference. So preparatory phase, we try to increase these capacities. It may be any capacity. I just gave you 3 examples. Capacity of a state and capacity of the people. It can be capacity of your communication systems. It can be your economic capacity. You can choose to develop your economy even before the disaster is occurring with an anticipation that if a disaster comes, my economy will be shattered. You can increase your capacity. How? You can build good number of industries in safe places, not in vulnerable places, so that you had the capacity to cope up even after the disaster. For example, if your state is consciously allowing you to establish more and more industries in a place where there is high possibility of an earthquake, the capacity of that economic activity to come back or bounce back again to normalcy will be very less. So in part of preparatory phase of disaster management cycle, I will try to take care of this capacity. I will try to increase my capacity as much as possible so that my disaster impact will be as much lesser as possible. You're not getting confused, right? I mean, you want me to repeat or you want me to clarify again here? Is it confusing to anyone? Please respond. Audio, please.
So can you just repeat that last part, sir?
Which part actually?
After that, bouncing back to normalcy part.
Yeah. Nothing. Just the ability to bring back, bouncing back to normalcy. The capacity building. I'm talking about the larger concept of capacity building. This capacity building is very, very crucial in the preparatory phase itself. Your capacity to withstand a disaster. That's the point I'm trying to make. It's just nothing but I gave you an example that maybe that might have appeared a bit confusing to you. So that's the reason. Even the capacity is needed at every stage. Capacity in facing the disaster. For example, you must have enough equipment if a disaster actually occurred. For example, take the COVID again. Our capacity is very less in the initial days. We don't have enough number of masks. We don't have the capacity to produce the masks. Take the second wave. We don't have the capacity to supply oxygen. So capacity to withstand the disaster in the event of a disaster is very, very less. So disaster management cycle and disaster management asks you, even before the disaster occurs, increase this capacity in the preparatory phase. Then this does not stop, this capacity part does not stop in preparatory phase also. Even when the post-disaster, this capacity becomes very important. Here, the capacity takes the form of building back better, capacity to invest in rebuilding, your capacity to reach all the people who got impacted. For example, assume that there is no Jan Dhan accounts, assume there is no concept of public distribution system. After the COVID disaster occurred or after this lockdown has been imposed, if we do not have the capacity of a network of PDS all across the country, do you think that all these migrants would have got food, or all these poor would have got rationed food items in the event of such disaster? Obviously not possible. Only because we had this capacity, even in the post-disaster phase, we had this ability to cope up better. I think I am clear on that. At every stage of a disaster, I am trying to tell you capacity is important. Capacity of whom? Capacity of everybody. Victim, as well as the state, as well as the media, as well as any other stakeholder. Capacity is important.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, can you give some brief examples of those stakeholders?
Yes. Stakeholders of the state, for example, the political mechanism, the organizational mechanism, the bureaucratic setup, the local bodies, and all these things. Capacity of the people to respond. When, for example, the actual victims who are facing the actual disaster. Then the economic capacity for all these two stakeholders, their economic capacity, their political capacity. If it is a bit confusing, I will try to make a small write-up and post it on the group. Will that be fine to you? I will try
Yes,
to
sir.
quantify it in the form of a diagram. I think that will be more clear. See, these online classes, this is the
Yes,
drawback.
sir.
Yeah, I cannot use a board and I cannot connect you to physically. Yeah. Right. I think there is a
So, sir,
lot to be.
so capacity building is an umbrella term which is in all the three stages of disaster management cycle.
Yes.
And sir, it in preparatory phase it includes like hazard zonation mapping,
Exactly.
risk reduction. These all will be included in capacity building.
The capacity. See, the problem with this disaster management is everything is related to every concept.
Yes,
You
sir.
can write anything under every concept, and that's the beauty also.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I think it's 4:30. There is a lot to be discussed. I think early warning systems is pending. Concept of disaster risk reduction is pending. Can I take extra 10 minutes? Do you mind that? Or should we continue tomorrow?
10 minutes is fine, sir.
Yeah. The first phase, see, now I am trying to explain the key things from at every stage. For example, take this concept of early warning system. Open your handouts and take this early warning system. Assume that question. Discuss what is meant by early warning system. Discuss its significance in course of disaster management. How will you tackle that? The moment I say early warning system, our minds have been trained to think in one dimension. The first thing which some of you might have got popped up, a satellite might have popped up in you, or a communication system might have popped up in you, or a cell phone message might have popped up in your mind. So these are the things which we generally think of. An early warning system has several things in further. Refer the diagram which I had posted there. Right? What is meant by early warning system? Early warning is nothing but something which processes, it may be any process, aimed at reducing the impact of natural hazards by providing timely and relevant information. So a hazard is yet to happen and it has the potential to bring in a danger. The various mechanisms I try to trace this, how the various informations of this hazard, how severe it is, where it is. For example, take this Indian Meteorological Department. What is the early warning system of floods? It is employing supercomputers. It is employing huge number of personnel to do what? Nothing but it is providing timely and relevant information regarding this disaster called flood or disaster called super cyclone or so and so. So any process which aims to lessen or reduce the impact of natural hazard, it may be any natural hazard, by providing timely information as well as relevant information. See, if a flood is coming and if I tell you after the flood had actually impacted you, then there is no point in giving that information. So it has to be timely. Forecasting of a disaster and its impact. Yes, forecasting is just one part. That's the point I'm trying to make. Over the next course, you will realize that forecasting is only one aspect of early warning system. Early warning system, according to United Nations Developmental Program, to be precise, has 4 different dimensions, which is very, very important. We are programmed to learn only one dimension, that is forecasting part, right? Now let's get formally into this early warning system. See, this early warning system basically is a legacy of India to the world. Previously, people did not have much focus on early warning systems. It is only when 2004 tsunami impacted India, the world started realizing the potential of how early warning system is very, very important in preventing damage a disaster can create. Not only for that, for any aspect of a disaster. See, only if you have a definite warning beforehand, only if you have an early warning system, you can prevent yourself from a disaster. Only if you have an early warning, you can actually assess how much damage it can do. Only if you have an early warning, you can protect yourself, and this action will automatically make it easy for you to get back to normalcy. If you are ignorant of if there is no warning, you will not protect yourself and you cannot be back to normalcy. So early warning system is important for every aspect of disaster management cycle. It is crucial not only for prevention, but it is also crucial for bouncing back better or building back yourself better or coming back to normalcy. So early warning system is not only about prevention. So it is predominantly a prevention strategy, risk reduction strategy. More or less, it is a risk reduction strategy. So now don't get confused. What are the various components of it? Once you learn that, you will you yourself will appreciate this concept. Now see the diagram. Early warning systems. Some of you had said that dissemination of information is the most important aspect, but that's not the point. The first and foremost key ingredient of an early warning system is knowledge of particular risk or particular hazard. Risk knowledge. This I am not telling. UNDP is telling. United Nations Development Program is telling. Right? Risk factor. You have to understand first the nature of that risk. For example, unless you have that knowledge of what is the potential risk involved in that, you cannot have an early warning system. See, to give a meaningful warning, you must have certain knowledge about how powerful it is, how risky it is. So that translates into, again, the concept which we discussed in the beginning of the class. Risk assessment, knowledge about that risk. How will that come? You can have knowledge about a particular risk, about a particular yet to happen disaster, only if you know its hazard potential and its vulnerability potential. So knowledge about risk, as simple as that. If you know hazard and if you know the hazard potential and if you know the vulnerability status, you can assess the risk, and assessing this risk is the first step in early warning system. Because if you don't know this risk, if you don't know that COVID has the potential to kill 100 people for just one sneeze, the level of warning will not be the same. If you don't understand the risk that this particular tsunami has the potential to create mass death of 1 lakh people, you cannot give a meaningful warning. Level of your warning will depend on your risk knowledge about that risk. So that is the first step in early warning system. Second is monitoring. I think I'm clear on this. Can I shift to second part?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Monitoring and warning. This is the second step. Most obvious logical outcome. See, once you understand the risk, you have to communicate that risk. You see, Indian Meteorological Department cannot say that I know that this cyclone is risky, but I will only my scientists and my office staff will know that. That's not possible. That's useless in course of disaster management, right? For a successful early warning system for an early warning system to be called as successful, this knowledge of risk has to be followed by monitoring of that risk as well as communicating of that risk. Sorry, now monitoring as well as warning about that risks. You must be continuously monitoring it. Is the risk same today? Will it remain the same in the next 1 hour? Is it dynamic? What are the dynamic changes in it? And at the same time, you must have the infrastructure for it. For example, everybody knows that a flood is risky, but if you don't have mechanisms to measure the quantum of that flood, how will you give early warnings? So mechanisms to monitor those risks is very, very important, right? The second aspect of early warning system deals with this aspect precisely. And here it is where we use the various equipments which come to our mind, like the various the equipments to actually measure the quantum amount of risks, the satellite imageries to detect the quantum of forest fires is just one example of that. So on and so forth. For every disaster, there is a different equipment to measure or monitor the quantum of that risk. So once knowledge, then you monitor that. Based on that knowledge, you monitor the dynamics of that risk. Then third aspect of early warning system, you have to communicate with it. Communicate with whom? To all the stakeholders who actually are getting impacted. You have to communicate that to the state so that they can organize all the activities. You have to communicate it to the people so that they take care of themselves. You have to communicate it with the NGOs so that they will become part of any help if needed. So this communication is also part and parcel of this early warning system. You cannot say that I have enough knowledge of risk, I had enough ability to monitor that risks, but I will sit calm. I will keep all my information to myself. That's not possible. So here comes the third key aspect of an early warning system, that is ability to communicate what you had actually monitored. This is given in the diagram as dissemination and communication. How you disseminate. For example, previously somebody asked what is meant by SPAN, statewide area network. It's just a simple, for example, National Optical Fiber Network. While reading about the governmental schemes, you might have come across this BharatNet project and all these things. Statewide area network is nothing but a network of all mechanisms to disseminate this information. It may be anything. It may be, in olden days, this network used to be telegrams. Now it is internet, or now it is phone calls. And we had went even a step ahead in Kerala in one of the disasters to communicate with all the stakeholders. The state government partnered with Facebook because social media has been the recent most innovation in way of communicating better. So this communication is the crucial aspect. Unless you communicate better, this early warning system is not complete. For a successful early warning, you must have the ability to communicate successfully. Only then disaster can be managed, right? Then the next step. Now that I understood the risk, I am monitoring that risk, I am communicating what I have monitored. The job is not done here. Now assume these people do not have the capacity to act on all these things. I know the information, I gave the information to state government. Now assume it did not have the capacity to act. It did not have, for example, the local people do not know. I know the risk of that flood has a potential damaging risk. I monitored that flood of which level it is coming in. I communicated that flood is coming in this direction. Please be careful. Now assume by the end of the day, the person who is living in that flood impacted area do not know how to swim, or the local government did not have any provisions of relief and rehabilitation material there. They don't have capacity to of shelter homes. For example, they don't have the capacity to shift them to safe places. They don't have enough number of government vehicles to evacuate all these people. They don't have the capacity to give them shelter or basic necessities. All three aspects will become waste unless you have the fourth aspect, capacity building. So that is the holistic parts of early warning systems: ability to monitor the risk, the ability to understand the risk, that is risk knowledge, then monitor it, then communicate it. Also parallelly building the capacity to act on all these three, along with these three aspects, capacity. So you remove any part of this, early warning system is incomplete. This I am not telling, United Nations Developmental Program is telling. Only when you have the consonance and concurrence of all these four elements, you have early warning. Only when you have early warning, you can prevent a disaster and manage a disaster. Only when you successfully manage it, you can reduce the loss of life and property. So that's the point I'm trying to make. Micro level early warning system, part of disaster management cycle prevention, which in turn is part of disaster management. So this chain should not be missed. What you are learning, where your learning fits in, how is it useful? I think I'm clear on that.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for your extra time. I think there is another concept of disaster risk reduction.
Sir, apart from the satellites as an early warning system, can you name any other devices that are being used for early warning?
For example, the satellite imageries for forest fires. You had this these digital thermometers you had while the COVID pandemic has come. You had the digital thermometers. That is the ability to understand. You had the most able biotechnological laboratories to understand the biological risks involved. For example, the Wuhan lab in itself is an example of this technical equipment. This technical equipment forms a key part to monitor these risks. For example, unless you have a well-established biosafety level lab, you can't understand the risks which are being posed by this new COVID variants. If I'm speaking about biological disasters, right? Unless you have the safety equipment, unless you have this, there will be some specialized equipments to measure the level of flow in a river. I forgot that name. Unless you don't have that clear-cut equipment, you can't understand the depth of river flow and what is the quantum of this potential of having a flood, which quantum of flood is about to come. Then we had the equipments to measure the severity of air pressure, the supercomputers and all these things. See, for example, you must have read this recently, the Indian Meteorological Department, they had a series of supercomputers to monitor these things, like Param series, I guess. More and more artificial intelligence models are being created to understand and monitor the severity of a potential hazard. So these are all the various equipments that depends on the disaster. For every disaster, we had a specialized equipment.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, you just please go through the concept of disaster risk reduction, which has been given here. Then we'll be discussing about PM's 10-point agenda of what actually this disaster risk reduction is about in the next coming class. I think we're out of time now.
Sir, supercomputers are used in just cyclones or other hazards also.
As far as my knowledge is concerned, the Indian Meteorological Department is using the supercomputers to create artificial models to determine the path of where the cyclone is going, which curvature they might take, and all these things.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, but there is no limit to this artificial intelligence, right? Even this artificial intelligence, if you can combine with the supercomputers, you can even predict anything based on that depends on the algorithm.
Yes, sir.
I think we are done for the day. Let's continue in the next class. If you had any doubts, feel free to ask me. Somebody has, if you want more details on capacity development, you just see the photographs which I had posted on this case studies in part of community-based disaster management. Using these local resources, these people were taught the capacity to build a raft in the event of flooding. These people are having the capacity to build a bamboo home, which other people may not have, to prevent themselves from the raised flooding levels of water in their habitations. So these are all the examples of capacity. So I'll be discussing this in much more greater detail over the few course of classes. If you had any doubts, they will automatically get destroyed because it's an evolving topic. You will get clarity once each micro thing which we discuss, it adds up to your clarity. Can I stop the session? You want me to ask any further doubts? Yes, thanks.